everyone. Welcome to episode 5 of In Suspense, a podcast and vodcast for fans and writers of crime fiction. I'm Lauren North, and if you are watching, then you will notice that it is not Leslie sat beside me today. Leslie's on holiday. She'll be back next week. But I'm very lucky to have my lovely friend and author of Look What You Made Me Do and All in Her Head, Nikki Smith, with me today to co-host the show. So welcome, Nikki.
Hi, Lauren. It's lovely to be here, standing in for Leslie, who I hope is having a very well-deserved, lovely week off.
I'm sure she is. I think she's sparring, which is very nice for her.
Nice.
So yes,
Nice.
I'm not jealous at all.
No.
So where did we go? Last week we had another mini-sode with the fabulous Philippa East, and it was actually my favourite one because it was all about recognizing and relieving stress, which is something I seem to need on a weekly basis. So definitely one to check out. It's only a good 10 minutes, so really, really good one to think. But today, Nikki and I will be talking about pushing the genre boundaries in thriller fiction, which is a really interesting topic, isn't it?
It is, absolutely, yes.
I should say, actually, this is a bit weird for us because normally we record the intro before we do the interview, but because our guest, Kate Mildenhall, who wrote The Mother Fault, who's coming on shortly, or we've already done the recording, and because she's in Australia, we recorded it at 9 a.m, which is quite early for us. So we're now doing the intro second. So I feel like, wasn't Kate great? And let's talk about Kate. And it's very weird for us. So I'm sorry if it feels a bit muddled. It's because I'm a bit muddled, I think. But before we go on to our topic, we do like to have a catch up. But obviously, Nikki, and this is your first time co-hosting, so rather than a catch up, it's just a catch, I think. So what have you been doing?
It is indeed, Lauren, yes. Well, I've been waiting for news. I think so many authors know what that's like. We spend much of our working lives waiting for news. Yes, that's been a kind of interesting couple of weeks, and it was good news, but I'm not really allowed to say anything else about it. So that's also very frustrating for people, I'm sure, watching. And the other thing I've been doing is trying to write a synopsis, which is, I think, my least favourite bit about writing, and I think that yes, trying to condense 90,000 words down into 3 is always a very difficult task without making it feel flat and unexciting. So I've just been doing that, and I've also been listening to some of your mini podcasts with Philippa. I know she did one on kind of waiting for news and being on submission and things, and they're brilliant, really, really useful, really helpful. So if anyone hasn't watched them, do take a look or listen in.
Thank you. Yes, we'll have news on our next set of mini-sodes for Series 6 coming soon. So that we're very excited about them as well. I think they're going to be just as useful.
And what have you been up to, Lauren?
That's a very good question. I feel like when anyone ever asks me that, or I'm talking to my friends or family, I start talking about books and they're like, which book is this? And I think obviously they've lost track of it. And I feel like I've lost track of it myself this week. So I've got copy edits for my first romance out in May. I'm doing today or tomorrow. I've got my line edits for my secret book 5, which I'm not allowed to talk about. So, you've got the whole waiting for news, and then you've got the whole waiting for the announcement. So you can talk about the news, which is where I am, and then hopefully by the end of this week I am going to be starting the planning of my new book. So I'm quite excited because we had Sophie Hannah come on the show a little while ago, and she talked a lot about but she talked about her dream author program, and I've been sort of umming and ahhing about whether I would join, and I think listening to her talk made me realize I did really want to join, and I've joined. And one of the things she talks about is how she plans books and how she recommends that everyone should do it this way. So it's more planning than I normally do quite a lot of planning, but this is more planning. So I am going to try the method and see how I get on with the extra planning. So it's almost like a cross between a plan and a very messy first draft, I think. I don't know how it's going to go, but I'm excited anyway. So that's all that's going on for me this week. Oh, and my son's birthday is this week. Tommy's 12 this week. So that's exciting.
Oh, you'll have a teenager next year, Lauren.
Yeah, he's already quite grumpy. So But on to our topic. So pushing the genre boundaries in thriller fiction. So Nikki, what do you think? Do you think we need to be pushing the boundaries for our thrillers?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really interesting question, and I think it's a great idea to be able to push boundaries in books. I think it can help to give a book kind of something different and unique, which editors and readers can, notice, and it can help make a book stand out. And I think, so many books now are marketed as thrillers. It's such a popular genre. And, you've obviously got kind of crime thrillers, you've got psychological thrillers, you've got dystopian thrillers. So, if you can push those boundaries into kind of some other genres, then they can attract readers from other genres as well. So I think that's a good thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. Isn't it interesting with the genres as well? Because I think so many books that were like a decade ago considered like maybe dark women's fiction are now psychological suspense and thrillers, because that's the genre that everyone wants to be in, isn't it? Well, the one that our publishers all want us to be in, I think. But it's interesting because I think a few years ago, an editor said to me, this bubble on this is going to burst. This popularity for thrillers is going to stop, but it hasn't, and it won't. And there is such an unquenchable thirst for thriller books, which I feel myself, I absolutely love it. But I think what that does mean is the market is so saturated, and we've read so many books with like the unreliable narrator or the anxious mother, which I know all about. It's a case of we do need to find a way to stand out, don't we? And so pushing the boundaries is definitely one way to do that, I think.
Yeah. I mean, I think you're right. There are an awful lot of kind of psychological thrillers on, in the marketplace today, and so anything that's kind of slightly different or unusual can take off. I think Colleen Hoover's book Verity, it's that's marketed as a kind of romantic thriller, which you would never really have seen those two kind of genres pushed together. I think even kind of 2 or 3 years ago, I just don't think people would go, oh no, that doesn't cross over. You either do romance or you do thriller. You don't tend to do both and get the kind of sales that she does. And she's been incredibly successful with it. So it just shows, I guess, that readers are looking for something different, and they're happy to read things where the genres blur.
Yeah, and I think that's a really interesting point about Verity, because I love romance books and I love thrillers, but I think this is probably the first one I've read as a cross one. I was a bit dubious about how I would find it, but I really enjoyed it, and I think it can really, really, you can get so much more out of a book when you push the genre boundaries, I think.
Yeah.
Although that is only one way, isn't it? Like obviously there's other ways you can stand out, like characterization and things.
Yes, absolutely. And I think it has to be done well. I think that's the thing. I think if you pick up a book and you think, oh, it's not really one thing or the other, then that's not, I don't think that's going to work. It's got to be done really, really well if you are going to cross those boundaries. And that's difficult. It's difficult to do, I think. Yeah.
And I think there is still a lot of nervousness around that in the industry. I think I think it's hard. I would struggle to do it because I would worry that it would not find a home. And then it's quite a lot of work for something that I would worry wouldn't find a home. Because obviously I write romance and I write thrillers, but I don't think I could ever put them together because they're just so happy and I don't want them to be sad. Or they're really anxious and upset. I don't want them to smile and kiss someone. I wouldn't ever cross those ones, but maybe different ones.
Yes, but there's no way I could do romance. I'm definitely not a romantic kind of writer. So I would dread to think what one of my books would end up like if that was in it. But yeah, I think thriller all the way for me. So yes.
Yes, and you write them so well, very haunting.
Thank you. Yes. So are we going to see what our guest today?
Yes, our guest, Kate Mildenhall, who wrote The Mother Fault, which is a dystopian near future thriller, who could not be better placed to talk to us about pushing the genre boundaries, is joining us on the show now. So welcome, Kate, to In Suspense. Thank you so much for joining us. We're absolutely thrilled to have you here. Nikki and I have just had a little conversation about our topic today, which is pushing the boundaries on thriller fiction. So we're really excited to have you on here because obviously The Mother Fault does exactly that. And before we dive into our many, many questions, I'm going to read your bio. So all our listeners know a bit more about you. So Kate Mildenhall is the author of Skylarking, which was longlisted for the 2017 Indie Book Awards and the 2017 Voss Literary Awards. She's currently teaching creative writing to students and hosts the First Time podcast with Catherine Collette. She lives in Australia with her family. You can find her on Twitter at Kate Mildenhall. And Kate's second novel, The Mother Fault, is published by HarperCollins in the UK, and it will be released in paperback on the 3rd of March. So yes, that was it. So what I really loved about your book is just how much my heart was racing, like most of the way through it. There was this real sense of panic, and I really identified with Mim's character. So can I ask, as we kick off the show, for you to tell our listeners a little bit about The Mother Fault, please?
I can, and thank you so much for having me. And I love when people say that they were panicked. Some of my friends even called me to say, "I'm sorry, I can't read it anymore." They had really little children and they couldn't read it anymore. So the story really is Mim's story. So Mim is a mother of 2 young kids. She's been on parental leave from her job as a geologist when the novel opens, and as it opens, her husband has gone missing. He works on an Indonesian mine site and he cannot be found. And Mim and her kids and Ben live in this very near future Australia, surprisingly like what it is really around the world at the moment. And in this near future Australia, everybody has a chip in their hand. So when Ben can't be found, the government in charge tell Mim that she needs to just stay put and they'll keep it under control. But she feels very threatened. She's worried for her kids' safety. And so she takes off on this kind of road trip, yacht trip to find her husband and to keep her kids safe.
Yes, that's a great summary. Like Lauren, I raced through your book. There we go. Just hold it up there. I think we've got the UK kind of style cover there. And yeah, I absolutely loved it. And I thought that in the first few chapters, you did a brilliant job of creating a world that it's familiar to us. We recognize it. And yet there's this huge sense of unease in the background. Because you realise that something terrible has happened to society. And I wanted to know, did you do a lot of research into climate change and politics before you wrote the book? And is this the direction that you fear society is heading into?
Well, great questions. And, yes. And in the time since I've written the book, some of those fears, both political and climate, have come to pass. I think I never intended to write a kind of book set in the near future. My first book is historical fiction, and I read really widely, but not necessarily speculative fiction. But when I started with this premise of a woman on the run with her kids, because I had 2 young kids at the time and I was dealing with all that early motherhood stuff. Plus I was concerned about the kind of political situation we're looking at around the whole world in terms of the movement of people and people being displaced and how they were being treated. And as I tried to kind of grapple with how I would set that up in Australia, I realized that I needed something big to have happened, some kind of political change. And so, it's referred to kind of that there's been a terrorist attack, that there's, it's about 20 years in the future. In terms of the climate change stuff, I really just looked at the science and looked at the maps. I'm assuming you've got a similar thing in your part of the world, but particularly around the top part of Australia because of the lay of the land there. We can look at the CSIRO maps, our government kind of maps, and see what will happen when sea levels rise and where they will come to. So that was kind of simple. The thing that I didn't get right and that I had to change during the writing was the bushfire situation. And in fact, I was editing Mother Fault in the summer of 2019, 2020, where we had those horrendous fires on the east coast of Australia. And myself and my family, we were actually camping and had to be evacuated and really quickly, and lost all of our kind of camping gear, which is a very small thing, but in the scheme of everything. But it was truly confronting to look at, like, my kids' bikes were melted and, there's just an axle left of kind of our camping stuff. So I remember that summer in the editing process that I really had to go back and look at what I'd predicted for these kind of unprecedented fires, and it's only a tiny bit in the book, and I had to write that kind of further. And I suppose, I mean, gosh, look at what we're facing worldwide and the situation at the moment in the Ukraine, and the political situations, they've kind of all happened somewhere else. I was going with that theory that, you know, Margaret Atwood has with the Handmaid's Tale, that she said, well, I just used things that have already had precedence in the world. And so I kind of went with that situation. So yes, we don't have chips in our hands yet in Australia, but that idea of surveillance being just all-encompassing and everywhere is something that does happen in lots of places in the world. So yeah, it is kind of me working out my fears, isn't it?
Yeah. You definitely feel it. And I think all mothers probably feel it. And what was amazing about the chip in the hand thing is I think it's so true that all these things to start with seem like such a great idea. And it's so like, why wouldn't we do that? We've got nothing to hide. There's no problem. I'm no problem at all. And then it just slowly, you can realize how easily that situation can unfold, where suddenly someone can see where you are and tells you you have to be somewhere. And if you're not,
Yes.
then you're in real trouble. And I could really feel that fear that Mim had for her children. So it was amazing. And our topic for today, as I said, is pushing the boundaries of thriller fiction. So when you first started to write the novel, I was wondering whether you sort of had this intention to write this near future dystopian thriller, or if the idea sort of formed slightly differently to that. Can you tell us how the idea came about?
Yes, I love that question so much, because in fact, the fact that it is kind of genre pushing got me into trouble in the end. And I can talk about this now because it's not stressful to me now, but I did lose my first publisher of this book, partly because the book had moved so far from what it was, which ended up being great, because then I got a literary agent for the first time and a fantastic new publisher, both in Australia and the UK. But it was seen to be slightly problematic that when I was trying to explain it to people, like, you know, it's kind of like a domestic realism set in the future, and it's also kind of a road story and a thriller, and people were just looking at me like, I don't know what you're talking about, like, this is crazy. And so I definitely didn't intend that, but I kind of just wanted to put in everything that I love reading. So, you know, I was so interested in exploring this idea of the mother who is both will do anything to protect her kids, at the same time as sometimes being really cross with them. And it's really hard to write a book where there's kids on every page, as I imagine it would be hard to try and, you know, keep them safe and escape somewhere when you're looking after kids all the time and they're with you all the time. And as it was for anyone who went through any kind of lockdown with their children. So, you know, I think I wanted that aspect of it, and I also wanted just to be a page turner. I wanted to really push that and all of those feelings for a reader to say, yes, I could not put this book down. I also knew that I really enjoy a little bit of unresolved sexual tension in what I'm reading, so I was going to throw that in there as well. And so that's the way it kind of formed, like much more of a mishmash. And it was only when we got to the other end, when I was kind of trying to pitch it, that I really had to think about what those things were. Having said that, an amazing writer in Australia, Charlotte Wood, who I know is published in the UK, I did a mentorship with her. I was very lucky to do a mentorship while I was writing The Mother Fault, and it was one of the questions I came to her with was, I don't know what this book is. And she was very good at kind of giving me permission to just write the story as it came out, rather than to worry about those other aspects of genre, which are very much, they're useful, and they're really useful at the other end for the publisher and the bookstores and people who are advertising books, but they can kind of make an author feel a little bit hamstrung, or they did for me.
That's very interesting. I think, I mean, The Mother Fault has got a lot of themes running through it, hasn't it? That's there's kind of climate issues and government control, and obviously marriage and motherhood. And so was it your intention from the beginning to kind of pack so much into it? And do you think that's kind of important in today's overcrowded market, to kind of get as much as you can into a book?
This is really interesting, because I think, no, to be honest, I didn't intend it at all. I just, I were interested in all those things and had a lot of feelings about all of those things, particularly at the time that I was writing. So they all made their way in there because of that. I think at times, if anything, I was encouraged by different readers or editors to kind of take some stuff out. But I think especially for women, especially for parents, there is always so much going on in our heads. And also this real disconnect of the fact that you are kind of worrying, in if you happen to be privileged in the kind of way that me and my family are, that you worry about, screen time and whether I gave them organic vegetables and whether have they done enough kind of after school sport this week, at the same time as worrying about like, well, the earth is on fire and what's the political situation. Like, you've got this real disconnect of these massive problems that keep you go into that anxiety spiral at 2 a.m. in the morning. And you're thinking about both those things at the same time. And so in a way, I wanted the story to kind of reflect the fact that Mim could be, putting her 2 kids on a yacht and escaping the country that she's always lived in without papers, without anything, and at the same time kind of worrying what she looked like in her bathers because of this guy she's kind of got the hots for. Because I think like that's how brains work, right? Whether we like
absolutely.
it or not.
Yeah, true.
Yeah, no, that's so true. And that definitely came across. So as you mentioned a few minutes ago, your first book was more historical. This one is obviously a dystopian thriller. So do you think there's too much emphasis put on which genre a book should sit in? Do you think readers should have more opportunity just to read the back of a book and decide if they're going to like it based on the blurb, rather than this is a thriller and this is dystopian kind of thing? What's your take? Where do you sit with the whole pushing the boundaries?
Yeah, I think, look, I love things that push boundaries, and increasingly, I think I go for those kind of books too. I've just finished over this Australian summer. I finished Anthony Doerr's new one, Cloud Cuckoo Land, which kind of does all of these things. Like it's phenomenal. It's huge, and it does so many different things. And I think, look, I do think it's useful for a degree. I know that, when you talk to booksellers, and booksellers, of course, are the most incredible people in the world, and that they will say, it's an easy kind of shortcut. If a reader likes this thing, then I can hand them this thing, in the same way that we do comparative titles, which it's hard to resist making those comparisons. But and also there's all those genres which have very tried and true readerships and authors who go stylistically. I'm thinking in romance and particular types of crime and things like that, where you have to stick, or sci-fi, hardcore sci-fi, you have to stick within that genre, those genre boundaries. But other than that, I think, I'm assuming that it's the same in the UK, where there's a bit of a kind of a, the literary fiction writers sit over there at that table and the crime writers sit over there at that table. And I hate that stuff. Like, I love going to all the different tables. I think it's so much fun. And I also think, you can, as authors, we can take a lot from other genres, reading in other genres and seeing how story plays out, and some of the really incredible ways that you write towards an action kind of ending or a thriller kind of ending. Like, I watched so much film and and TV series as I was writing The Motherfolk, because I was like, what are the beats that you have to hit to get to a kind of really big ending like that? I would love for publishers to take more risks, I suppose, when people are saying, oh, I've got this, I don't know, speculative romance. I don't even know how you could cross all the boundaries, but, I think it's fun to think about those things as well.
Yeah, I think we have seen a few more risky titles coming out in the UK. I think during the first lockdown, they shrunk, I felt, and it was very, very much stick in your genre. But I don't know what you think, Nikki, but it certainly feels like there's been a few more recently.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, like speculative kind of romance and things, I've seen a couple of those, and and there does seem to be a kind of, sometimes you can push the boundaries, but I think you're right in that I think publishers have to kind of really believe in the book and really be behind you before they're willing to do that. And I think it's difficult, because obviously when books go into a bookshop or even a supermarket, I mean, that takes up, a lot of the sales in the UK now, supermarkets as well as bookshops, the reader will go to a particular area on the shelf to kind of pick out that book, and that's if they want crime, they'll go to the crime section, and obviously covers play a big part in that as well. So I wanted to ask, with your covers beautiful, did you have any input, and were there kind of discussions around, should we go down the crime thriller route, should we go dystopian, should we go book club, did you get any input?
A little bit in the UK. It's very different. I know you can see behind me, but you can see. So this is obviously my beautiful UK cover, and in Australia, this is the cover. So much more kind of
it does
literary,
look more book clubby,
non-crime.
actually.
Yeah.
Yes.
So really different, and to me that's super interesting. I mean, that's what we do. The podcast that I co-host is about. We interview authors, but we also talk about the publishing industry a little bit, like what obviously you do as well. And it's always so interesting to see how book design works out, especially in different territories. And I know that for The Mother Fault in the UK, I very generously, Jane Harper read and endorsed the book. And I know that that's that kind of look, which is, very Australian, very kind of road trip, as well as that idea of the kind of, I suppose, the crime look, is that it was meant to sit with those kind of books, with Jane's, with Chris Hammer's, with those other Australian kind of crime books. But to me, it's so incredibly interesting when they, when they come at me with a different cover. And there was a little to and fro with this, not much, but mostly that's because I think in that department, yes, I'll write the book and I'll work with my editor and do all of that stuff. There's this incredible team within a publishing house who knows where to pitch and what happens with book design. It was such a shame that because of the last 3 years, without mentioning the word, I couldn't come over to the UK to kind of also see how it sits in bookshops and see how it's responding to authors, to readers, because that's one of my most favourite things to do, is to obviously talk to the booksellers and talk to readers about how the book is going. And in fact, in Australia, a lot of the book clubs that I visited, the UK cover more. They've seen that online and they're like, oh, I want the UK cover.
Oh, really?
You can never please everyone.
No, that's so true. There is no pleasing everyone.
No.
And talking of books, obviously you've got your own podcast, which is called The First Time Podcast, that you host with your friend Catherine Collette.
Yes.
So you obviously, like us, probably get quite a few books through the letterbox for looking for sort of a little shout out and things. But what have you been reading recently? Like what book have you got you can recommend us?
So there's a couple. One of them I have to shout out to, which is a UK writer, the wonderful Sarah Winman, whose book Still Life I read and adored, and I had the chance to interview her for the next series of our podcast, which is coming out soon, just this week. And she was just such a delight to speak to as well, about craft and about how the book came into being. And I know that it's one here, especially over the summer, where we tend to, go to the beach and all hang about and swap books, that was really easy to press into people's hands at a time where it's been, a lot of people have been looking for something a little lighter and more joyful. And the other one that I know is an Australian writer, which is out in the UK very soon, if not already, is The Last Woman in the World by Inga Simpson, who's an Australian, best known here really for her nature writing. And she's made this switch over into this kind of thriller, road trip, bushfire. It's the most extraordinary book. You cannot put it down. Very
wow, it sounds amazing.
Tense. Yeah, it's incredible. It's incredible. I think it might be published with Little Brown in the UK. I'm not entirely sure.
I'll have a look for that though.
Yeah, but it is really terrific, political, climate change, and just terrifying, really. So that's another good one I can recommend.
What about you, Nikki? What have you been reading?
Well, I've got a couple. I've got this one that, let me just put it on there. I don't know whether you can see. Yes, it's called A Terrible Kindness, and it's by Jo Browning-Rowe. And I mean, I normally read all kind of crime thriller type books, but this isn't. This is something very, it's very emotional read, and it's about a man called William Lavery, who's working as an embalmer when he's called to the Aberfan disaster, which was this huge mining disaster in Wales. But it's not really about the disaster at all. It's just about him and his life, and how he kind of deals and comes to terms with his difficult childhood. And it's just a really beautiful, really touching kind of book, and I loved it. So I completely recommend that one. And the other one that I've been reading is that one there, which I don't know if you can see. It's got a great it's got a lovely kind of figure there of a girl.
Oh yes, I didn't see that. It's called Little Sister. Who wrote
Little
it?
Sister, Geetha Lodge.
Oh yes, of course it is. Yes.
And it's actually the third in a series, but you don't have to have read the rest of the series because it's kind of, works as a standalone. But there's a detective, Jonah Sheehan's, and they're trying to solve that you don't know whether it's a murder or not, but basically one girl walks into two girls walk into the woods, and one girl comes back out again, and it's kind of what's happened. It's brilliant hook, incredibly twisty, and you really don't know what's happened until you're kind of reading the last page, which is she writes very well. So yeah, I love that as well. How about you, Lauren? What have you?
I just had to look it up because I couldn't remember the title and the author. So I'm listening to Notes on an Execution by Dania. I'm probably not going to pronounce the surname properly. Kakafka. I don't know if you can see it. It's just, oh no, come this way. So it's got this gorgeous fox on it. And it is, really dark, really interesting story about a man who's been sentenced to death, and sort of his, it's sort of in the past, how he got there and sort of waiting. And I'm reading A Men Along's A Good Day to Die, which is really just violent and lots of action, which I'm really enjoying. So yes, but I skipped a question and I forgot to ask you, Kate, what are you working on next? Is it another dystopian thriller, or is it something different again?
It's another good question. It started as straight up historical fiction. So I don't know about how this comes to you when you're doing your writing, but I don't have a bunch of ideas like set up for me down the future. Some authors have like, oh yeah, I've got my next 6 books lined up. I'm like, no, that does not happen to me.
I don't have that, Kate, either.
Okay, great. Okay, I'm so great. That's excellent. So it's based on actually a meatworks in the I live in the 30s, and the kind of union work and stuff that was happening there at the time, and women who were living there and working there. And then it kind of blew up and got bigger and more interesting. So it has got a few different elements involved now. And I think, I actually think on this kind of question of crossing genre boundaries, that having done The Mother Fault and knowing that there were people from all different kind of readerships who contacted me and said, I would never have picked this book up, but so-and-so posted about it, so I did, and I loved it. Or, I don't read sci-fi, but I like this. Or I don't read literary, but I like this. That it has given me a kind of confidence to go, oh, well, I'll try this thing, and if I make the story good enough, and if someone is invested in the characters enough, and if they turn the pages, then it will find its readers. So yeah, it's very exciting. I started a PhD at the same time, which is mad. So I'm doing that as part of the work as well, which is
that's
fun.
Amazing. I'm very in awe then. And that's interesting that you said that, because Nikki and I were talking earlier about how pushing the genre boundary is one way to stand out, as an author, but also we've all read these books where nothing has really happened, but you just are desperate to find out what's going to happen next, even though it's just someone's day. And that's all about character, isn't it? I think there's so many ways I think you can stand out as an author. And that's really interesting that you've said that.
Yeah, absolutely.
But we're moving on to our fun question now, which is our last question. So we like to ask something fun, hopefully fun. Anyway, we've had some very strange, dark answers sometimes when we ask questions like this. So as The Mother Fault is all about sort of a journey of escape, we wondered what's the worst or most funniest journey you've ever been on, Kate?
In fact, the The worst and best journey that I've ever been on was part of the research for the Mother Fault. So part of the Mother Fault takes place. This isn't a spoiler. It takes place on a yacht, and I knew I needed a yacht in the book, but I had never been on a yacht. So I decided that the best way to work out that part of the book was to volunteer to be a crew member on a yacht race from Darwin at the top of Australia into Indonesia. So I signed up. And I put my name down on this kind of website. So I was just doing what authors do, Googling late at night, how does get from Darwin to Indonesia on a yacht? And when I found this race, I thought, oh, can't hurt. So I emailed and said, I have absolutely no experience on yachts, but I'm very enthusiastic and friendly, and I'm willing to have a crack at different things. And I'm writing a book. And would you like me, to take me on your yacht? Anyway, I didn't really think that I'd hear everything. And I signed up for a very expensive course to take place in the bay, much closer to where I live. And then about a month out, I got a phone call from this Captain Neville from Darwin, who said, do you still want to come on the yacht? The deal was that I would have to hot bunk with the only other woman on board. So we were on 2 different shifts. She was on the day shift and I was on the night shift. And there were 6 other blokes on board. And my husband basically said, look, go. And if you kind of feel weird when you get to Darwin, just fly home again.
Yeah.
So off I went on this adventure. Flew up to Darwin. I was on the yacht. We were on the water for about 4 or 5 days.
Wow.
And then we were on this tiny island of Ambon in Indonesia for another few days. And then I flew back. The scariest part, like I did think I was going to die when I was on the yacht, even though afterwards they said, no, that wasn't even really bad weather at all. But on the way home, it was a chartered flight from Ambon to Darwin on this plane they called the Flying Cigar. And you couldn't stand up in it. It was so small. And then I had the the blow up dinghy underneath my seat in case we crashed. So it was the maddest kind of adventure that I've been on, but it was incredibly important in the writing of the book. Partly because I did understand. I didn't take my kids on the yacht, obviously, but I did have all the fear of being on the open ocean and also the beauty of it, but mostly the fear. And then also in Ambon for the first time, since I'd been about 19 backpacking around the world, I was completely on my own and able to make decisions on every corner. I was like, okay, yeah, I'm going to turn left or I'm going to eat here and I'm not going to worry about anyone else. And so that idea in the book, which is about, women being many layered people and that you're not just a mother or, just your job or just a wife, that really kind of solidified for me when I was there, and I felt very brave, even though I felt a little foolish. So that was my worst and best journey ever.
Wow. Sounds amazing, doesn't it? What about you, Nikki? Was yours a flight as well?
Yes, we flew back. It was about 5 years ago now. Just before Christmas, we'd been on holiday, and we flew into. It was a weather bomb they announced in the UK. So it was just horrendous. And the plane kind of came down to fly into Gatwick, and you couldn't see anything outside the windows. It was pitch black, and it just felt like we were hitting concrete. They kept trying to go down, and then they would go up, and then they go down again, and then they go up. The air hostesses were crying.
Oh God!
People were throwing up left, right, and centre. It was by far the worst flight we've ever been on. Anyway, they had to divert. They couldn't get down in the end. They had to abort. And we got told initially that we were going to have to go to Amsterdam. And then a couple of minutes later, the captain came on and said that they didn't have enough fuel to get to Amsterdam. So we had to go to Manchester. So we did the entire flight to Manchester in silence. Everybody was everyone was just desperate. And we got down. It was fine. We had to wait on the tarmac for about 4 hours before we could get off the plane. Somebody had a heart attack a couple of rows in front of me. They had to get ladders up to the side of the plane to get
my goodness,
any steps. It was just one of those, horrific. But the pilot came out afterwards. And he was kind of walking around the plane when we were waiting before we could get off. And he said he'd had 11 years flying experience in the RAF, and he'd never flown anything, never had seen weather like it. So I kind of felt a bit like, that's as bad as it's going to get.
Yeah, hopefully. If he's saying it's bad. Yeah.
Exactly.
How long did it take you to get on a plane again?
I was okay, actually. I think I kind of got the first kind of hour of actually going through it, and I had my kids with me as well, so and I was having to be very, it's fine, don't worry, it's completely fine, everything's fine, and they were quite young at the time, so I mean, not babies, but they had like earphones on and like looking at iPads and things, so they were relatively didn't take too much notice of it. But I think I kind of really felt just, well, whatever, resigned to it. So it was fine. How about you, Lauren? Wouldn't want to do it again though. Yes.
Well, mine isn't a flight and wasn't that scary, but when I thought about journeys, I thought about the time I was in my early 20s, and I went to Florida with my boyfriend, who's now my husband, so he likes to remind me of this constantly. And I had been to Florida as a 13-year-old, so about 10 years after I'd been the one time. And you know what you're like when you're 13, you don't really pay attention to where you are or where you're going because you don't have to. But I got given the map, and this was like before Google Maps was a thing. And I just directed him. It was dark, and we spent an hour driving around. I was like, oh yeah, there's that thing over there. I remember what that is. It's just going down, keep going here, keep going this way. I didn't have a clue at all. I think it took an hour before he really twigged. He pulled over and was like, right, let me see the map. Actually, we were nowhere near where we were supposed to be. So that was a little lesson there, not to give me a map, I think.
Yeah. Oh, brilliant. Well, I think that's probably all we've got time for today. So thank you ever so much, Kate, for being our guest today and for all your insightful answers. It was an absolute pleasure to have you.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It was really lovely to chat to you both.
Yes, thank you both. Thank you, Kate. And also thank you, Nikki, for being such a fabulous co-host. Leslie's back next week with our penultimate mini-sode, which is on building confidence in your writings. That's another great one to listen to with Philippa East. And in our next full episode, don't miss the phenomenal Sarah Vaughan, who is coming on to talk about themes. I met Sarah very recently at the Whitley Bay Bay Tales event. And it was a very fangirl moment for me. So I was not cool at all. But as Nikki said, that is all we've got time for. So it is time to say goodbye from me and goodbye from Kate.
And it's
goodbye from Nikki.